This is Mungo Darkmatter, and welcome to Dark Matters. Today on Dark Matters, we're going to discuss what an alt is, why people have alts, and how you can use an alt. An alt is short for alternate character, and in games where you can create separate characters, sometimes people will have an alt for various reasons. For example, in a game like World of Warcraft, where you might create a character that's a warrior or a mage or a hunter or a druid, you might have multiple characters so you can experience what it's like to be different types of characters. For example, you might have a warrior character and you might have a hunter character, and you might use those because you might enjoy the difference between the two characters, or you want to see what the difference between the two characters are. In Second Life, most of the content is created by the users. So you have different sims, and some of them are role-playing sims, and some of them are even sims where universities teach classes. And so there are many reasons to have the sims, and there are many reasons why people have characters on the sims. So, for example, if you roleplay, you might have a separate character just for role-playing, or you might have a separate character for a particular type of roleplay to keep things separated. If you're a builder or a clothes designer, you might have an alt to test out things like the security of doors. You might have one to use as a model that's a different size, shape than your main alt to model the clothes, and so on. So it's kind of like having somebody test your stuff without having to call on a person to test things. So if you have an alt, for example, and you want to check out group permissions, you can give an alt reduced group permissions, and you can log in as the alt and check to see if they're set the way you think they are. So that's another reason you might have an alt. Third reason to have an alt is some people use an alt as a bot, or which is short for robot. So it might be running a script or in conjunction with a script that you need a character actually logged on to do things. Another reason is you can actually have a bot standing somewhere to record any open chat that's going on if you want to monitor that for whatever reason. So there are many reasons to have an alt. Some of them legitimate, some of them illegitimate. For example, there are griefers on Second Life, and a griefer is somebody that just kind of causes problems. Like they might res a lot of objects on a sim and try to disrupt things. And griefers will often have a lot of alts because they're trying to hide who they are so they can go on and continue to bother people. That would be an illegitimate reason to have an alt. A legitimate reason would be you might be into medieval role play, and you might want a separate character for that. You also might want a separate character just to get away from things. If you are administrator of a sim, for example, it might be a roleplay sim, so you might have a character you use for roleplay, but you might have a separate character you use for administering the sim most of the time. That way, if you're building something or you want to be out of character, you're not getting a lot of IMs from people. And when you're in character, you can also limit who's IMing you for, administrative stuff. So you can keep the roles kind of separate. If you're someone who's a creator or a designer, you may design using one alt and have another alt where you can go around and not be IM'd by your customers about problems and such. Having an alt is kind of like having a PO box. Some people want to keep their private residence separate from a business residence, or they might want to have a separate post office box for many reasons. So you can look at it like that too. Okay, here I have an alt I created, and I used a basic template, one of the choices they give you. But this is just to show you this alt looks different than I do. He's shorter. He looks to be dressed in kind of 19th century clothing and such. So you can have an alt look totally different than you, or you can have an alt look exactly like your other alt, depending on why you have the alt. One thing to consider is if you want an alt that's kind of an anonymous alt and you don't want other people to know what the alt looks like, you don't want it to look like your other alt. You want it to look as much different as possible, probably. If for whatever reason you want people to know the alt is your alt, then you might want it to look exactly like your other alt or very similar. So keep these things in mind. If you want to keep the alt secret for whatever reason, you also want to make sure there aren't a lot of similarities between your alt and your main. For example, you might have the same hair. It might be a different color, but it might be the same hair, and people might recognize it. So you want to consider things like that to keep them separate. If you want people to know who your alt is, you can actually list in your profile your other alts or the alts you want them to know. You can use an alt for many multiple different purposes, so consider it carefully as you're planning it out, and also consider who you want to know who the alt is, or if you want everyone to know it or no one to know it, or some people to know it. Consider the reason you're making the alt. I'm Mungo Darkmatter, and this has been Dark Matters, and whatever you do, enjoy playing Second Life.